I guess to kind of get a feel of the room, mostly to see who should be here versus who should be out there working on their project. How many people here are familiar with Python? Or have, okay, that's good. How many people here have written a RESTful API before? Okay, that's also good. Because the next one is going to be how many have done that in Python. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about Flask and a bunch of nice tools for using that to make RESTful APIs. So I'll also be explaining what that all means. I guess how many people know what REST means or RESTful APIs or have interfaced with HTTP APIs before? Okay, awesome. So you're all in the right place. Because if everyone knew all those things, then this would kind of be a waste of your time. All right. So, oh yeah. Also, these slides are currently not available online because something happened with my GitHub auth token. So I'll be hosting them locally, but I'll show you where you can find them after this talk when I get my life figured out. Anyone who's interested in finding the slides, you can go to my website. It's capalmer1013.github.io. Also, anyone who wants to kind of follow along, I'm going to be kind of going through like setting up a dev environment stuff for Python. So yeah, this would be a good thing to have, but the place I keep the slides, you can't get there from the homepage, so you just add /slides to the end. And then there's all of these, which I see that my, whatever the heck it is, my current slides are not up there yet, so they should be up there probably within an hour after this talk. So I'm just going to host it locally and kind of talk through this. So, yeah, because here I've got a local host of that up, and you can see building an API in Python will be the last one when I get my life together and all of that updated. F12, that's not full screen. F11, cool. All right. So, things you'll need for this. Python 3, I mean, if you have Python 2, then I hope you also have a time machine. Flask, the main API thing I'm going to be using. Also, once these are available online, these are all links that will lead you to the documentation for those. We're going to be using Flask SQL Alchemy, which is a ORM, object relational mapping library. This is so that you don't have to write plain SQL in your backend code. And Flask RESTful, which makes your life a lot. You know what? I'm actually going to rotate here so I'm facing nearly everyone. Flask RESTful, which is a nice library for doing whatever the heck. REST APIs makes a lot of stuff very easy. And see, Flask Migrate, this is going to be, because we're doing a backend API, we're going to be interfacing with a database. So doing your standard like operations with a database, storing stuff, grabbing stuff, all that. And pipenv is optional. I personally think it's one of the only sane ways to deal with Python environment stuff. And to follow along, clone the following repo. This repo actually does exist though. If you go to my GitHub, I have no idea what it looks like when you're not logged in. It might be easy to find, it might not. So it'd be github.com/capalmer1013. Repositories, I believe it's public, but API demo. This is going to be the code that we're going to be working off of. Sorry I wasn't able to get the slides available because that link would be so much easier to get to, but yeah. That's the thing to look for if basically this repo is something that y'all will be able to clone this and kind of get a basic RESTful server up and running And I tried to file it down to the minimum amount of stuff so it's not too bloated. Does everyone who wants that URL have it? Is there anyone who's still trying to find it?
Is it which URL, the last one?
So this is github.com/CAPalmer1013.
Oh, I'm on that.
And then /API demo. And that, it should be, if you go into my repositories, it should be like the first one. And there's a horrible picture of me from years ago I need to update. Yeah. All right. Is there anyone else who's trying to get to that who doesn't have it open? Cool. Okay. I don't present enough, so I have no idea what these buttons are. RESTful APIs. So RESTful APIs, it's a concept that you can use in like HTTP backend programming. So let's go to the next slide. So it kind of relies on this idea of separating out your front end and your back end. So there's like this non-RESTful idea of you hit a website, like PHP is like this. Does anyone here have PHP experience? Okay, handful. PHP and other templating backend kind of things where it's like you go to the page, and obviously PHP has RESTful stuff, but you go to the web page and it has templates where it's rendering HTML and hitting a database, doing whatever, and dropping variables into places in the code based on what it gets out of the database. But REST, as it says up there, stands for Representational State Transfer, which sounds like nonsense. But it's a design philosophy. Well, it's a design. It's design principles around making a server interface. So one of the first things that it has to have is it has to have this uniform interface. So you're identifying resources. So basically, you're using your like an example here is with GitHub, like github.com, then this is my user ID, and then that is the repository name. So those are both resources, because like if you go to my page, that just gets all of the stuff about my GitHub, and then this just gets all of the stuff about this specific repository. So that's kind of the concept of identifying these resources. Next, you're manipulating resources through representation. So they have uniform representations in server responses, and it's like you know that you're going to get, like, if you do the different HTTP verbs, which I guess I'll get to later, you can typically know, like, if I do this thing, you know what it'll do. It's not like people are making those slashes that are like CA Palmer 1013 slash git repository slash whatever the repo is. And self-descriptive messages, information on how to use it is what should be responded with. And hypermedia is the engine. So that's basically, you're using HTTP for this. The source for all of this, again, if only I had this where you could find it, is this RESTful something.net. So yeah, uniform interface. That's like, you can consistently know between any RESTful interface how to use it just by the structure of it. It's got that client server. It's set up as a client-server relationship. Like I was saying, you have a front end that hits the back end for the information. Stateless. So that's one of the big important things. So with RESTful design philosophy, there's not going to be any information that is, I don't want to say stored in between sessions, but other than like the database resource stuff, you've got, like, you hit the endpoint, it will do the thing. There's nothing being stored in memory on the server that is required to be able to run that again. Cacheable, basically, responses should say, like, is this cacheable? Is it not? If it is, then client can reuse that data for the same request later. Like, cacheable meaning, like, we know that this information isn't going to change. You can consistently use this to represent the same thing later. And layered system. So like I was saying before, with GitHub, it was like github.com/myusername/the repo name. So when you go /username, you're then in the context of me as a user, and then you have access to the things like my repos. Like, that's the important thing. Like, there's a hierarchy, and it's like if you're doing object-oriented programming, you're accessing the attributes about the objects that are layered inside other objects. And then resource methods. So who here has used SQL before? Okay, that's a reasonably good number. So you're probably familiar with CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete. So in SQL, you're like, for creating things, you're going to be doing like insert into commands, reading, it's select queries, and update and delete. You're basically signaling like, here's the resource I want, delete it or update it with this information, etc. Now, there's basically direct mappings from those in a RESTful sense, but these are handled with HTTP verbs. And HTTP verbs, like, normally browsing a website like I was showing with GitHub, this is just doing a get. This is, well, let me get to the verbs, but this is just doing a get. It goes to the website, it grabs information, it's not changing any of that information. And this is a small amount of tabs. So here's the HTTP verbs that kind of directly relate to those, but they're not in the same order. They're just in the order I'm always used to seeing them. So you've got get, like I said, that is just for, it's basically read. It's the same as doing a select query on a database. You're grabbing data, you're not manipulating it at all, you're just getting data. Post is going to create a new resource. It's basic, and it normally would return, like, here's the ID or whatever to find that resource later. Put/patch, there's an important Stack Overflow thing here that explains the difference between the two because it's very specific and I have to look it up every time. But put in patch is basically an update. I think in the example here I don't remember which one, but I use one of them. And then delete is to delete an existing resource. And those are all the slides for REST. So now, this GitHub repo I was talking about, I think those are vaguely up to date. I'm going to kind of walk through here. Yeah, so I believe these are mostly accurate. If you have Python and you have pip and pipenv, I personally prefer, you should be able to run this. So like you go into the main directory, run pipenv install, copy your environment variables and update them, and then do the, well, I lost it. Do the database upgrade and run a local server. So I will demonstrate that. Oh, hey, that actually worked the way I wanted it to. Okay. Okay. All right, so how many of y'all are Linux people, Linux users? Okay, I would say that this is going to be easiest, probably on Mac, maybe on Mac too. but it's going to be easiest on like Linux or WSL in Windows. But let me see. Yeah, so I've got this. Where was I? Yeah, so basically I'm using a makefile here. It's got these commands. These are the useful things of handling your database migrations. Database migration is basically, in this context, is you make changes to your schema, so like what columns, tables, and all that stuff you're going to have, and it basically generates scripts to adjust whatever database you're connecting to be most up to date. Local server just runs a local instance, and this is a thing that sometimes breaks, so I included it in there. I currently have my, this was the easiest way to set it up. I spun up a Postgres database in Heroku, and that's what I have it connecting to. So we've got these, I've lost everything. So it's got this env example here. That basically stays the same, and if you've got a URL to connect to a database, you can just drop it right in there. And quick, everyone memorize my database connection string, and that's all the time you get. But yeah, you basically copy that to .env, add your database URL, and it should be good to go. And the structure of this project is pretty simple. So we've got migrations. You don't have to look at any of these. These are all auto-generated things that basically just make your life a little bit easier. But the, oh, and the proc file is in there in case anyone wants to try and host this on Heroku. Very easy way to deploy database, backend things. Pip file, this is just the list of dependencies. When you would run pipenv install, it reads from here, installs these packages, and then you're good to go. Git pip does not need to be in here. I messed up there. But anyways, sample server. Hello? Init.py, so with Python projects, init.py is like a special thing. You have that file in a folder and it makes it a Python package. And here we're running pipenv run, yeah, that is still visible, gunicorn sample server app. That init file basically makes it so that gunicorn knows that this is going to be a Python package. This is just handling a bunch of imports, like models and API. That's all we have here. Here's some dependencies, and this is how you read from that .env file, set your database URL for SQL Alchemy, and just other basic setup stuff. But the main backend stuff is in here in the API. So this is where, like I was talking about those resource identifiers, this is where all of that stuff gets defined. So when you're using Flask, you have to basically make a Flask app. I'm using Flask REST-X, which adds a bunch of nice tools for making a REST framework, because Flask was originally a templating framework. So it's like a very small Python backend for generating templated pages and stuff. So anything that starts with API, this is going to be one of those REST resources. So api.route/users, this is defining the /users resource. Also, I currently have this hosted. The other nice thing you get with, I believe it's Flask REST-X, is it auto-generates, make local server. Okay. So with using Flask REST-X, you get a nice hosting of your docs for free, also, those docs are auto-generated. So I can just go to the base URL of the website that I have, and, or not website, API, and it gives me these generated Swagger docs. So I didn't name the namespace, so it's just default, but it shows me that here are all the resources that I have available, and here's the models that are available in there. You can click on these, it gives more information, really cool stuff that you get for free. Like I was saying, you've got this API route users, so that's the thing that's defined here, or not defined here, it's showing it here. And this is basically you use a class with a resource. That's RESTX defining a resource as a object there. I added a little doc description. That's where it's saying get all users. This is what's being grabbed and thrown in here. So you do have the ability to add custom things to the docs using api.doc. API.MarshalWith. So this is when you're returning something from the API, you have to define what the structure of that return is, and this right here is how you define that structure, and you pass that into this Marshall with, telling it's a list and all that. The little @ symbols at the beginning, these are, I would say, for beginner Python developers, not something you'd be used to seeing normally. They're called decorators, and these are acting basically as functions that the function below gets passed into it. So this get method is getting passed into this Marshall with method. That does some like before and after kind of logic around that, and then the function that gets returned from that is getting passed into api.doc. Just high level, the @ symbols are called decorators. That's, if you're not familiar with them, it's something to look into. So, let's try this out. So we've got this API route for users. I believe I cleared out the database, but we've got get, and it's going to return a list of dictionaries from the user account. So it's going to the models. Let me close some of these. So it's going to the models that gets imported. There's this user account, and this is the ORM right here. This is where SQL Alchemy is being imported. And these are basically, instead of, like I said earlier, instead of writing plain SQL, you now are writing objects in Python and saying like, here's the attributes of a user account. It's got a username. I added that because I was testing something, but it's got a username, and that's going to be a string, and here's the methods that I can apply to this. So yeah, let's try this out. I'm using Postman for the backend endpoints. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically a tool for testing APIs and being able to hit endpoints and doing a bunch of nice things with that. So, can I make this all larger? Zoom in, control, okay. That's more visible. All right, so if I get localhost 3000 users, it's sending the request, and you can see that's an empty array because there's nothing in the database yet. So the next verb that's in this user's resource is the post verb. So with this, I'm going. Let me close that. So with the post verb, it's going to use that. What was that?
Oh, sorry. I was telling them they could move so they can actually see the screen.
Oh yeah, I can see the screen. Yeah, so this post method, this is defining what's going to be done when you are making a post request to this endpoint. And this, it's going to take some request arguments. It's only going to take a username for this user, and it's going to pass that into the user account.create. Normally, the way to do this is to return the instance of the user you just created. I was really lazy, and I just return an empty object. Oh. All right, so let's create a new user. Yeah, test user. All right, so there, we're passing in to this post verb on local 3000/users. So, like I said earlier, we've got, this is the URL, and then this is defining the resource. And the fact that it is a post verb, if you're familiar with RESTful APIs, you can normally look at this and see like, oh, this is probably going to create a new user. And obviously, like, you'd have to look at the docs to see what it's expecting, and I have not defined what the parameters are, so who knows. But that would be something to put in the docs here. Yeah. So basically, this code's going to get hit when I run this in Postman. So sent that request. I got a 200 response, meaning everything's okay. And now we can get users again, and it will probably not be an empty list. And there, we've got username test user ID 3, because I've created 3 instances of things so far. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to the next things. So there's the API route for user/user ID. This, again, this is the nice thing about having that consistent interface with RESTful APIs, because if they're doing a RESTful API correctly, you'll know that this is going to be a user resource identified by an ID, and it should return me a specific user if I'm doing a get verb on that. And here's how I do that. This is, again, using the ORM. You're hitting the user account, you're querying on it, filtering by user ID, grabbing the first, turning into a dictionary, and returning that. So that is, instead of writing SQL there and having to do the, I guess, managing a session and all that stuff, that's all you have to do with an ORM. So, yeah, when I run this get request for getting a single user, I would say the ID should be 3. Since 2 doesn't exist anymore, I'm going to run that, and there it is. ID equals 3, username equals test user. So, yeah. Okay, so the next thing in here is patch. So that's the verb for updating that user. Again, if I go over to the docs, I check out the patch. Not very clear what the parameters are, but it's, I see that it is user's user ID. So I know that if I go and I have my patch endpoint, if I put the correct ID in there, and I pass it JSON representing whatever fields it's expecting, I can say, like, all right, let's change the username from, let me actually, can I clear this easily? Well, anyway, these are old things from when I was writing this last night. So I'm going to update that username from, let me get all the users again. I'm going to get user with the ID 3, and I'm going to update the username from test user to CA Palmer 1013. So that's, I send that, Uh-oh. How did this happen? Okay, filter by user ID. Or is that not defined? User ID dot first. It says user ID isn't defined. ID equals user. Models 62. Oh, I've clearly been changing a bunch of names around. Okay, so I'll push that change up. Well, what am I doing? Make local server. Okay, so I'm going to run that patch. There shouldn't be an internal server error now. Okay, so return to me the same ID. Username is now that, and if I go back and get all the users, I can see that it is that same user. I'll push that change up after I get through this. And then the last method is the delete method, which is more straightforward. Basically, you select a user. Once again, I'm just going to query that, see that that's there. Let's create another user, another test user, just so that we have, there are now 2 users in the database. I'm going to delete the one with ID 3. Okay, no errors. Now I get all the users, and now there's only that one user remaining. And here it's basically query the database for the user by ID, and then delete it. But yeah, that's the 30 minutes. That's good. Those are like the basics of writing a REST API in Flask in Python, and how basically the concepts behind making resources that are hierarchical like that, have a consistent like verb naming and usability like that. And yeah, the oh boy, I don't think you're gonna have any audio on that. Yeah, consistent naming and all that stuff, verbs. And the nice thing is, if you're familiar with REST APIs and you find the docs are normally consistent between a lot of them, it's easy to go from one to the other. And yeah, does anyone plan on using a REST API in their project, or do you need more time to think about that?
We've been using API in ours.
Okay, yeah, so if y'all end up trying to do this stuff, hit me up. I'll be around, and I'll be down to help anyone who's got additional questions about this. Just a second, let me probably not commit this. I'll do it later. But yeah, thank you. I'm going to be hanging out here probably for another 30 or so minutes in this room. Anyone who has any questions, I will be glad to help with any Python things. That's the only thing I know.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.